are very few people who know when to leave. Not when they're forced to, not when the opportunity dries up, not when the world moves on, but voluntarily, while the audience still wants them, while they could stay. Johnny Carson was one of those people. For 30 years, from 1962 to 1992, Johnny Carson was the last thing millions of Americans saw before they went to sleep. Not just the most watched, but in some ways the most trusted. He had a way of holding the temperature of the country steady, of taking the day's news and deflecting it with enough wit and enough warmth that people could go to bed feeling, somehow, that things were manageable, that someone sensible was still in the room. He was, in the fullest sense, a national institution. And then, in May 1992, he finished his last broadcast of The Tonight Show and walked off the set. No comeback tour. No special appearances. No late career reinvention or book or platform building exercise. Just an ending. Clean, clear, on his own terms. While the audience would have happily watched him forever. What followed was, by most accounts, genuinely puzzling to people who had known him. Not because he seemed unhappy, he didn't, but because he seemed, in his retirement, almost entirely uninterested in the things that most people in his position reach for when their primary work ends. He didn't seek new projects that would let him remain a presence. He didn't trade on his stature in ways that would have been entirely available to him. He read. He fished. He spent time alone in ways that surprised people who had watched him perform for 30 years. He sailed. He wrote material he had no intention of using publicly, just for the pleasure of writing it. People who managed to spend time with him in those years described a man who seemed, genuinely, more at ease than he had been in the middle of the career. Not disconnected or withdrawn, still present, still funny, still himself. But lighter. As if a weight had been set down that he hadn't fully registered carrying until it was gone. As if the simplicity of a life without the constant pressure of being Johnny Carson had revealed something about what he actually needed that the career, for all its satisfactions, had never quite provided. He had found, it seemed, that enough was enough. And that knowing when enough is enough, and having the courage to act on it, was its own kind of wisdom. Not the wisdom the world tends to celebrate. Not the wisdom of more and bigger and longer and louder. The quieter kind. The kind that says, I've done what I came to do, and now I'd like to find out what the rest of my life is for. Maybe you've thought about something like that. Maybe there is something in your own life, an obligation, a role, a set of expectations that you've been maintaining past the point where it genuinely serves you, because walking away from it feels like loss rather than liberation. Because other people would notice. Because you've been doing it for so long that it has become part of how you understand yourself. And because the idea of not doing it anymore raises a question you're not sure you want to face. Who are you when this particular thing isn't in place? That's a real and important question. And the answer is not always walk away immediately. Sometimes the answer is to stay, but to stay more deliberately. To stop doing it out of inertia and start doing it out of choice. which changes the quality of the experience entirely. And sometimes the answer is to begin, carefully and without urgency, thinking about what the next chapter could hold, and what simplifications would need to happen to make room for it. Johnny Carson's retirement wasn't the absence of a life. It was a particular kind of life, chosen deliberately, that the 30 years of professional intensity had made him ready for. Not everyone is ready at the same time. Not everyone's version of enough looks the same. But most people, if they're honest, can identify at least one area of their life where the accumulation has exceeded what they actually need, where more has long since stopped producing more of anything good, and has become simply more of what's familiar. Where in your life is enough already here, if you were willing to recognize it? What are you maintaining past the point of genuine satisfaction, out of habit or obligation, or fear of what stopping would say about you? What would simplifying in this one area make room for? Johnny Carson left while the audience wanted more. And what he found in the space that opened up, the fishing, the reading, the long private days, were things the audience would never see and that didn't require them to. Things that were simply his. Not a performance, not a contribution to anything collective. Just a life, lived for himself and the people immediately around him, in the unhurried way of someone who has finally decided that this, right here, this quiet, this simplicity, is exactly enough. That decision, the decision that enough is enough, that the present moment is sufficient, that you don't need to build or achieve or contribute at the pace you've been going in order to justify your existence, is available to you too. Not necessarily in the same form, not necessarily as a single, clean departure from something, but in small, daily ways. A choice to not add one more thing to a week that already has enough. A choice to let an obligation wind down that has been maintained past its usefulness. A choice to protect some portion of your time and energy for things that aren't productive in any formal sense, but that replenish something essential. Johnny Carson knew something, at the end, that the world keeps trying to argue people out of. That enough is enough. That the life available in simplicity is not a lesser life. That the audience wanting more is not a sufficient reason to keep providing it once you've decided you've given what you came to give. That it's allowed to be enough. That you're allowed to stop, not because you've failed, but because you've finished. So take a slow breath. And maybe, this week, let one thing be enough. Not everything, just one thing. One area where you could simplify, or stop, or decide that what's already there is sufficient. And see what the space it opens reveals. Johnny Carson found something good there. So might you. There's one more thing worth sitting with here. Something about the relationship between simplicity and identity that makes this kind of choice harder than it sounds. Which is that for most of us, what we do and who we are have become quite tangled together. The role we've played, the contribution we've made, the version of ourselves that shows up to the obligations and commitments, that version has become, in many ways, what we mean when we say me. And the question of what remains when some of that is set down is not a comfortable one to sit with. Johnny Carson had been the Tonight Show host for 30 years. It wasn't just a job, it was an identity, a way of being in the world, a structure that organized everything around it. And walking away from it required a kind of self-trust that many people in similar positions simply don't have. The trust that there was something there, some person, some version of himself that would still be interesting and vital and worth inhabiting once the structure was gone. He had that trust, and what he found confirmed it. The person who showed up in retirement, curious, private, genuinely happy in solitude, was as much himself as the Tonight Show host had ever been. Maybe more. Because this version didn't have to perform anything for anyone. He just had to be. If you're in a chapter of life where some of the structures that have defined you are shifting, through retirement or through the natural ending of roles that your children or your career or your community previously required, maybe this is worth sitting with as an invitation rather than a loss. Not, what am I losing? But who shows up when the structure steps back? What version of yourself has been there all along, waiting for a little more room? Most people who have made room for that question, who have created the space, by choice or by circumstance, for the post-structure version of themselves to emerge, describe finding someone there that they genuinely like. Someone a bit quieter than the professional version, a bit more curious about smaller things, more easily delighted by ordinary pleasures, less interested in what the world thinks of them, and more interested in what they think of the world. The person they always were, underneath everything, finally with enough room to show up fully. Johnny Carson fished and read and wrote things no one would read, and found, in all of it, a person he was apparently glad to spend time with. That's not a small thing. That's actually one of the most important discoveries a life can make, that your own company is genuinely worthwhile. That the self that's there when no one needs you to be anything in particular is someone you can be curious about, and comfortable with, and glad to encounter in a quiet morning. So take a slow breath, and maybe, this week, create a little space for the post-structure version of yourself to surface, not by abandoning anything you still genuinely value, just by letting one small, unnecessary accumulation fall away, and seeing what shows up in the room it leaves. Johnny Carson found something worth having there. My guess is you will too.